Everybody, this is Miss Corey. Today we are going to do a U3 L25 intro to the other side of war. So today we're just really going to set up kind of the background information for our next movie, and we're going to talk a lot about World War II and Japan. So if you are really interested in World War II, this slideshow will be for you. So, learning targets. You're going to describe the social, political, and economic causes and main turning points of World War II. Again, we're just going to focus solely on Japan and identify major developments in science, medicine, and technology, um, and analyze their benefits and danger. So, pretty much that means the atomic bomb. We're going to talk about today as well. So, as you watch the Ed Puzzle video, um, answer the questions that are in blue text just on the Ed Puzzle video. I'll remind you just to do that. And then any questions that I have that are in pink text, okay, you're going to answer those questions on your study guide. All right, so before we get started, here's just a map of Japan. So as you can see here, the largest city, which is Tokyo, is right here. But also be aware that today we are going to talk about a little bit about Nagasaki, um, and quite a bit about Hiroshima, which is right here. And then you can also see how close it is to South Korea, China, and then Russia. All right, so first question for you. What do you know about Japan's involvement in World War II? So anything that you know, just write it right now in the Ed Puzzle. So probably a lot of you had a variety of answers. Today we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. So the first thing that we should all be very aware of, the two sides of World War II. There's the Axis powers and there were the Allied powers. Axis powers include Japan, Italy, Germany. Allies will be France, America, Britain, and the Soviet Union. So as you can see by this graphic, Japan is on the other side of the United States. So kind of building a background information into why Japan entered World War II. So a lot of it had to do with the Depression. So you're probably thinking like, wait, 1929 into the 30s? That's like when the US had a depression. Well, yeah, because the US had a depression, a lot of the other parts of the world also went into a depression, including Japan. So during this time period, Japan really wanted to expand industrialization. They really needed resources, right? To make those products in their industries. The thing about Japan, they have very little natural resources. So, where do they need to get them? They need to get them from different countries. So, what they decided to do is invade China and French Indochina. So if you don't know what French Indochina is, it's these countries down here, like Laos and Vietnam. And at this point of time, so in the 20s and the 30s, France actually had control of these like little chunk of countries right here, due to imperialism, which is a whole different topic. So for simplicity's sake, just know that France um, controlled this part. And then in China, Britain had a lot of money invested in China at this point as well. So after 1929, Japan's military wanted to take over more land in Asia. So that's where they turned their attention to China and Indochina. So in 1931, Japan seizes Manchuria. That is part of China. As you can see right here, it's the closest part of China to Japan. It really wanted Manchuria because Manchuria has a lot of raw materials that Japan could use for industrialization. Japan also really wanted to be an empire like Western countries were. So, hey, if you're my world history class, we're talking about this actually right now. But like Britain had like this massive empire. The US had an empire too, although they don't want to admit it. France had a lot of empire, especially in North Africa. Japan wanted to get on the bandwagon. They wanted to be part of the gang. So they used something called the Mukden incident as a justification to invade Manchuria. And I'm going to talk about what the Mukden incident is in just a second here. But again, you can see, oh, yeah, here's again a map of Japan. Here's China. What you need to focus on right here is these two lines. Do you see these kind of weird looking lines? Those are going to be railroad tracks that are central to trade in China. So right here and right here, and you can see the city of Mukden right here. All right, so the Mukden incident. So on September 19th of 1931, the Japanese soldiers were like, "Oh, I got this great idea. We're going to dress up as Chinese workers and blow up the Manchurian railroad by Mukden, by the city of Mukden." And they're like, "Oh yeah, that's awesome because then we can just blame that it was like the Chinese who did it." Although it was just the Japanese who dressed up as the Chinese and blew it up. It's really quite the dramatic story. So Japan owned that railway, and Japan blames the Chinese for blowing up this railroad, although it was Japanese people in disguise. And that's how they invaded Manchuria and took Manchuria for their own. I know. It's a weird justification. So the League of Nations, if you haven't been in a U.S. history class yet, um, you'll talk about the League of Nations, but pretty much what a League of Nations is, it's very similar to what today's United Nations is. It was formed after World War One. It was meant to unite countries around the world, so there was no more world wars. Of course, that didn't happen. One of the biggest reasons why it failed is the U.S. Did not join, despite the president's wanting. So the League of Nations fell apart before World War II started. So, anyway, the League of Nations then condemns Japan for taking Manchuria. They're like, "What? Japan? What are you doing?" But the thing is, the League of Nations, they don't do anything about Japan. They're just like, "Japan, poo poo on you," but then they don't do anything. So Japan's like, "All right, well, I guess I kind of got away with that, so I'm just going to continue expanding." So Japan leaves the League of Nations and then continues on its quest to take over most of China and parts of Russia and Indochina as well. So, question one on your study guide. So, write this answer in your study guide. What did the League of Nations do in response to Japan invading China? All right. So let's kind of focus in a little bit more onto the China aspect of it. So Japan invades China between the years of 31 to 45. One of the big leaders in China at this time, his name is Chiang Kai shek. He is the former leader of the Chinese Communist Party. China became communist, although a communist country all the way back in 1911. Today it is still communist. Um, so Chiang Kai-shek, he really didn't want to get involved with Japan. So he comes up with an idea. So he tried to make peace with Japan, and he's like, "Hey, Japan, if I give you northern China, will you leave us alone?" Japan's like, "Yeah, I'll totally take it." But Japan wasn't satisfied. They kept on wanting more land from China. So Japan moved south, and Chiang and Communist China army fight Japan back. All right, so what this comes to is called the Sino-Japanese War, and by 1942, Japan is at its highest, um, like expansion of its empire. So you can see here, everything in red is under Japanese control. So you can see up here in Manchuria, parts of Russia, into China, down here in Indochina, and all like the Philippines and all these little islands. So they got a lot of land. All right, so the Sino-Japanese War. So the war between China and Japan is also known as the Sino-Japanese War. In 1937, Japan takes Beijing, which is the capital of China, Tianjin, and Shanghai, so some very large Chinese cities. They also station all of their navy onto the entire eastern coast of China, and this is really problematic because that is like where all the trade from all the other countries comes in. So Japan blocks trade to China from other countries, and Japan has a monopoly on Chinese exports. And what does the European countries do? They do absolutely nothing. They're like, Japan, oh, you gotta stop, dude. But they don't do anything about it. And that's really one of the big downfalls and why World War II happened. All right. During Japan, there was also a lot of humanitarian crisis at that point. So from 37 to 38, Japan occupies the city of Nanjing. That is where Japanese soldiers rape more than 20,000 women. Um, they also take over 200,000 Chinese prisoners, and they kill roughly the same amount of civilians. They also looted and burned the city. So, Chiang Kai shek does a really stupid thing to try to stop the Japanese forces. So, to slow the Japanese, Chiang was like, what great idea! I'm going to blow up the dam on the Yellow River. And the Yellow River is one of the most major rivers in all of China. So, he does that. And what happens is that the Yellow River floods, absolutely floods all the crop fields, houses, cities, everything, killing 890,000 Chinese, and leaving 5 million Chinese homeless or some sort of damage to their property. And you can see here, here's a city, and people are just rowing their boats in the street. All right. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, you can see where the Yellow River is. It's right here. So nice that I put in these maps. All right. So, what is like Japan's goal for all of this? So, they have four main goals. First one, they wanted to create a new order in East China. Okay, pretty much they wanted to be the top dogs. Two, to create an industrialized society, right? I kind of mentioned that before. Japan wants to become an industrialized country, and in order to do that, they need those natural resources from other countries. Three, they want Soviet Siberia. The reason why Siberia has a lot of coal, natural gas, diamonds, gold, and iron. And then number four would be to teach Asian countries to be like modernized into like kind of the Western technology. Yeah, so those are the four reasons. So, question number two, write in your study guide, name two of the four goals of Japan regarding invading China. I guess Russia too. All right, so a little bit more about Japan. So, Japan then took, like I mentioned before, they took the capital Beijing back in 37. Britain, so England, they had an incredibly tight tie to China, specifically in Beijing, with businesses, and they really saw the Japanese as a threat. And then Japan attacks France, France, Indochina. Um, so that's kind of how Japan makes a lot of enemies, especially with European countries, because they attack the European colonies. All right, you can see here, once again, here's Japan. So they're attacking up here in like Manchuria and then also on the Korean Peninsula. All right, so how did Japan get like kind of paired up with Germany and Italy? Like, how did that happen? Here's kind of the really like simplified version of it. So, kind of like the saying, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, Britain and France, right? They're allies. Okay. Britain and France have the enemy of Japan, right? Because Japan attacked their colonies in French Indochina and China. And Britain and France has the enemy of Germany and Italy. And so Germany and Italy were like, hey, Japan, like we have the same enemy. So you must be our friend. And then they become allies against their common enemy, the Allied powers. And good to note as well, Germany, Italy, and Japan also hated communism. So that's why they hated the Soviet Union. All right, so that turns into the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis, um, which just shortens up to be the Axis powers. Among them, they agree that there is no interfering with expansion plans between the three countries. So, like Germany can't interfere in Japan's taking over China and vice versa. And their common goal, again, is to be anti communist because they hate the Soviet Union. All right, so um, a few more of like Japan's goals include, again, Japan wants resources, like I said before. And the US is really mad at Japan because it attacked French Indochina. They're like, US is like, hey, whoa, France is our friend. Like, Japan, what are you doing? You can't attack our friend's colony. So the US decided to fight back, but not physically, economically. Um, they put an oil, metal, and airplane embargo on Japan, and that then leads to Pearl Harbor, which happened in 41. All right, so through all of this, who is running Japan during World War II? Like, what? So that would be Emperor Hirohito, although he's really not the guy calling the shots. So here's Emperor Hirohito here. Here's a slightly more modern picture of him. I think this is in the 90s, early 2000s, this picture. Don't quote me on that. So Japan still has an emperor today, by the way. They still have that system. Here's the current emperor right here. Um, the real guy who was calling the shots for Japan during World War II was actually the prime minister. And his name was Hideki Tojo. Um, and that is him right here. All right. Yep, so you can see here's just another map highlighting the Japanese empire expansion. All right, so December 7th, 1941. What do y'all know about Pearl Harbor? Just type it here into the Edpuzzle. No need to write this down. All right, so just super basic stuff. So Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which is a big Navy base. It sunk 18 ships, and there are 3,500 U.S. casualties. Here's the modern day memorial in Pearl Harbor. So the reason why Japan attacks the U.S. is because they put an oil embargo on them, like I just said a few slides ago. And Japan really needs oil in order to join World War II, right? They need the airplanes, the tanks, all of that. So they're really mad at the US that they stopped oil trading. Oops, what happened there? There we go. All right. So Japan also attacked the Philippines in the British colony of Malaysia. And they also invade the Dutch East Indies. So Japan is making enemies all the way around. So, question number 3, write this answer in your study guide. Why did Japan attack the US, aka Pearl Harbor? All right. Next, we're going to talk about Japan in the Pacific battles in World War II. I'll fly through these pretty fast. They're not super relevant to the movie at all. I just find them interesting. All right, so one of the biggest ones, or one of the biggest battles in World War II happened in the Philippines. It's called in the Bataan Peninsula, which is right here in the Philippines. So Japan attacks the Philippines, and the U.S. forces at Bataan, and Japan is actually very successful in this battle, and they capture 76,000 prisoner of war. And this has become really famous, known as the Bataan Peninsula March or the Bataan Death March. It's where the Japanese made the prisoners of war walk a 60-mile march from one POW camp to another. Along the way, Japanese armies beat, starved, shot, and beheaded prisoner of wars. And then only 54,000 prisoner of wars actually made it to the new camp. And again, this is called the Bataan Death March. So you can see US soldiers here, they're carrying like the injured that can't walk for themselves. So here's a map of the march, going from one to the other POW camp. All right, so the Battle of Midway. This was really the turning point in the war in the Pacific. The U.S. intercepts a Japanese message that they're going to attack the U.S. on Midway Island. Here's a picture of the island here. Here's another picture of the island. This is a modern day picture of the island. Apparently, there's a lot of seagulls on it. So the U.S. gets to Midway first, and they wait for the ambush. It is very successful for the U.S. They destroy 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. U.S. claims victory, and it again is considered the turning point in the Pacific War of World War II. So you can see Midway right here, pretty much in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There's Hawaii, so it's pretty close to Hawaii. All right, so island hopping. That was a tactic used by the US and its allies. So again, Japan is made up of several islands, like you can see on the maps I've been showing you. They have a goal to capture islands all the way leading to mainland. It's kind of like, say, checkpoints in like a video game, like you get from one to the next, to the next, to the next. But of course, it's real life and it's war and it's deadly and scary. All right, so Iwo Jima. That is a major battle in the Pacific Theater. It is mostly an air battle, actually, between the US and Japan. So, my question for you is, why do you think the US um, does most of the, almost all of the, okay, hold on. Why do you think the US did almost all of the World War II fighting involving Japan? It's because the US had the biggest navy during World War II, and also it's closest to Japan. It's only the Pacific Ocean that is between the US and Japan. So Iwo Jima, that is an island off of Japan. It's right here. It is scattered with lots of caves and crevices. And it also had 2 Japanese airfields on it. So it was a big target. So here is a picture of a modern day picture of what one of the caves would look like in Iwo Jima. So, if the island had caves and crevices, what do you think's gonna happen? That's right. People are gonna hide in those caves and do ambushes. So the US actually won this battle, but at a high price. 6,800 Marines were killed, 19,000 were wounded. Japan even paid a higher price. 18,500 of their soldiers were dead. Japan had a no surrender policy, meaning they fight to the death, so that's why their death toll is higher. So during this time too, there was a lot of kamikaze attacks during Iwo Jima, which I know you probably think of like Pearl Harbor for that one. So many Japanese lives were also lost in the kamikaze attacks. What are they? That is where they would take an airplane and crash it into like the US's like ships or bases or anything really. So the Japanese Iwo Jima soldiers who did come home alive were shamed for not fighting to the death, um, which was like really like disturbing. Like, why didn't you die? You should have died on the battlefield. And that's where many committed seppuku or harakiri, which we learned about during The Last Samurai. All right, so Okinawa. So on April 1st, 1945, US takes over Okinawa. It is an island near mainland Japan. And even today, it is still a US military base. So here's Okinawa. It's right like on the southern part of Japan. And a lot of US military members are there. So the atomic bomb. US President Harry S. Truman dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And this is going to be a big factor into the movie. The first one is in Hiroshima, which is what you'll see in the movie, which was August 6th, 1945. It instantly killed 80,000 people, leading to approximately 140,000 dead in that city, which is about a third of its city's population at that time. And then there's Nagasaki, which happened on August 9th and killed 74,000 civilians. Okay? These weren't like soldiers, these were civilians. Okay, so here is some pictures of the aftermath of the bombing. You'll see it in the movie too, but of course the movie is animated, so not quite the same effect. So you can just see here everything is just destroyed. This woman, this is really interesting. She was wearing a checkered patterned kimono, and the light of the atomic bomb was so bright, it actually burned the pattern into her skin. There's also these, they're shadows. So there was someone standing here. You can even see that the person was holding a cane and was standing right on the steps when the bomb dropped, and the light was so bright, it burned that person's shadow into the stone. And you can still see some of the shadows even today. All right, so after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the lasting impact on the entire globe is that people lived in fear of being totally annihilated. So, Japan surrenders to the Allies in September 2nd, 1945. It was really due to the heavy casualties of the soldiers, but also the atomic bombs. It really had no weapon to outdo the atomic bomb, and Emperor Hirohito surrenders on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. So now we're going to kind of focus a little bit more on um, a really big humanitarian crisis in Japan, which was hunger, and which is what you're going to see a lot about in the movie. So, like I said before, Japan had really little natural resources, little farmland. Here's a topography map of Japan. As you can see, it is incredibly mountainous, and mountains are not good for farming. Um, so, so any trade that was cut off, like between Japan and other countries, um, also cut off food supplies to the civilians, and there was a huge hunger issue. Here's kind of an account of what would happen, um, or like account of some of what happened to especially young children during World War II. So this is called A Boy's Lonely Death on a Broiling Street. It was a sweltering hot day, a month before the war's end. A crowd of people had gathered on the street about 100 meters from my house. I rushed over and saw a boy had collapsed. Where are you from? Where are your mother and father? He had no strength left to reply to questions from the people around him. All he could do was nod or shake his head, keeping his eyes closed. He was 13 years old. His family had all died in a major March air raid over Tokyo, and he was all alone. Attempting to go to relatives in the countryside, he had come as far as the town of Fukuroi in Shizuoka Prefecture. He had not eaten for days, so his body was emaciated, and he had no energy left to walk or open his eyes. Thinking they had to get him to eat something, several women ran home and brought back stewed pumpkin and roasted soybeans and put them in his hand. The boy opened his eyes slightly and seeming to say thank you, he gazed at the people around him. He brought his hand toward his mouth to try to eat the food, but he missed and it fell to the ground. 2 hours later, the boy no longer moved. He died at the age of 13. Okay, so this was not an uncommon sight to see throughout Japan during World War II. So the Japanese government, they knew there was this giant hunger issue. What was their solution? They're just like, hey, families, go send your kids to the countryside to live with their like rural relatives. So over 1 million kids were sent to the countryside to live with rural family members. This was in hopes to easing food shortages in the city. It didn't quite work. So family members sent kids to school hoping for a meal. Schools did not have a steady supply of food either. For lunch, they just let the kids explore outside and they ate whatever they could find, including rhubarb, mugwort, which I don't know what that is, bamboo shoots, freshwater shrimp, frogs, grasshoppers, ground beetles, pigeons, and snails. So kids and teens would then turn to thievery. They would steal food from farmers straight out of the field. Not because they wanted to, but it was literally in order to survive, or else they had no food. Adults also sent kids to steal food. And the reason why they did that, because adults are like, hey, they're kids. They're probably not going to get arrested for it. And also, city kids would ride trains to the countryside just to steal food and then go back home on the train.